What's up, NSS? Here's the Russian dude. There's a number that should terrify anyone still pretending that this war is something distant, abstract, or neatly contained within trenches and front lines. Since 2022, at least 1,000 people inside Russia itself have been eliminated by returning Russian servicemen, so-called veterans. Not on the battlefield, not during combat operations, but at home. In apartments, in courtyards, in kitchens, in bedrooms, in front of the children. And this number only reflects the cases that managed to crawl past censorship, pressure, intimidation, and the justice system's deliberate blindness. These were not robberies gone wrong. No, they were not murders driven by profit. They were not even crimes committed exclusively by pardoned convicts or private military servicemen or mercenaries, although those exist in abundance as well. No, many of those killings were carried out by just regular soldiers. Men with no prior criminal records, nothing, not even a stolen chewing gum from the grocery store. Men who came back from war changed in ways that the state refuses to acknowledge, let alone address. Triggered by a phrase, a look, a sound, a comment that flipped a switch in their heads. And instead of accountability, the system offers them something far more dangerous. Immunity. Investigations quietly dropped, trials never started, criminal cases suspended due to redeployment. Murder is just a bureaucratic inconvenience, basically. Just imagine a country where you can take somebody's life for whatever reason, as little as it can be, and just be pardoned just because you were at war. I'm sure such a country will have an amazing and prosperous future, right? So today, let's talk about what Russia is rapidly becoming as the war grinds on. About the people it sends to fight, the people it sends back, and the social catastrophe that is already unfolding in slow motion. One of the most corrosive things a government can do is signal that violence has no consequences. Not in words, but in actual practice. And that is exactly what the Russian justice system has been doing since the war began. When a soldier commits a violent crime, especially after returning from the front lines, the law suddenly becomes flexible. Investigators can refuse to open a case, prosecutors can pause the proceedings, courts can conveniently disappear from the equation altogether. And just like this, the perpetrator is quietly sent back to the front lines, as if redeployment were a form of moral absolution, as if going back where you came from cleanses you all from your sins. Even previously convicted criminals enjoyed the same loophole. It's crazy, but just think about the ridiculousness of that. Serve a little time, sign another contract, go back to war, and that's it, your past dissolves into patriotic fog. It's not just a mere loophole at this point, it's a policy by choice. And the message this sends is devastatingly simple. Killing is forgivable if you are useful to the state. And usefulness is measured not by morality, but by your willingness to be boots on the ground. This legal exceptionalism does not just protect criminals, it actively reshapes behavior. When people know that they are shielded from consequences, their thresholds change. Words turn into triggers, arguments turn into assaults, domestic disputes turn into funerals. And because none of these crimes are motivated by money, they are very hard to predict, almost impossible. They're very hard to prevent and far more terrifying. You cannot simply negotiate with rage. You cannot de-escalate a nervous system trained to interpret inconvenience as a threat. The worst part is that this violence is not hidden from the authorities. It is observed, documented, categorized, and then quietly ignored. The state sees it, the state understands it, and the state chooses to tolerate it because prosecuting violent veterans would undermine the myth of the righteous war hero. So instead, society absorbs the damage. Families absorb it, children absorb it, neighbors absorb it. And so the body count grows. But why would these Russian soldiers even attack their own families, friends, and fellow countrymen? Aren't they fighting in Ukraine for exactly the opposite reason? To protect all the Russians no matter where they are. Well, let's try to answer these questions in our next chapter. There is a convenient narrative floating around Russian propaganda circles that everything can be explained by PTSD. That it's tragic, yes, but manageable. That it is a medical issue, not a societal one. This framing is comfortable because it suggests a limited scope and a clinical solution. Diagnose, prescribe, move on. But this is dangerously incomplete. PTSD is real, documented, diagnosable, and in some cases treatable. But combat does not just cause PTSD, it rewires people. Human beings are not built for sustained exposure to extreme violence. Even the most psychologically resilient person cannot walk through months of explosions, death, fear, and moral collapse without internal damage. In combat, the body lives on adrenaline and cortisol. Constant fight or flight situations, hypervigilance becomes the norm, aggression becomes functional, empathy becomes the liability. Over time, the brain adapts to survive. Hormonal systems recalibrate, thresholds shift, and the biggest problem begins when that adaptation follows the person home. Sudden noises are not just annoying, they are perceived as attacks. Raised voices feel like threats. A crying child can trigger a panic response, and panic, in someone trained to neutralize threats, often turns violent. This is not a character flaw, it's biology. A psychological response to prolonged stress that modern society pretends can be switched off with a train ticket home and a plastic medal. But here is where it gets worse. Not all combat-induced changes qualify for diagnosis. Many veterans do not meet the full checklist for PTSD or psychosis. They fall into gray zone. Maladaptation, behavioral distortion, emotional blunting. Their condition is not official, so it does not exist in the Russian healthcare system, but absolutely exists in real life. In broken families, in alcohol abuse, gambling addictions, reckless driving, bar fights, domestic terror that never makes the news. And because Russian culture still worships the idea of the tough man, seeking help is stigmatized. Therapy is weakness, medication is shameful, real men endure, real men explode. As a result, families are left alone to deal with their loved ones. And since they have absolutely no idea, knowledge, or qualifications to treat such people, well, it often ends up in a complete disaster. Let's talk about it in our next chapter. One of the most chilling consequences of war is how it distorts moral perception. In combat, human life loses its intrinsic value. People become functions, targets, coordinates, call signs. The language itself changes to protect the psyche. Murder becomes neutralization, execution becomes zeroing out. These euphemisms are not propaganda accidents, they are survival mechanisms. But when those mechanisms migrate into civilian life, they poison absolutely everything. A person who spent months operating in a hierarchy where violence was rewarded does not automatically relearn restraint. They return to a society that suddenly feels slow, inefficient, irritating, rules seem arbitrary, authority feels weak, and worst of all, no one around them understands what they have seen. This creates alienation, resentment, a sense that others are inferior, fragile, undeserving of patience. This is where domestic violence explodes. And yes, explodes is the correct word. Not physically, of course, but you know what I mean. There are already unofficial guidelines circulating online telling wives how to survive life with a war veteran. Basically, endure the beatings, don't provoke, cover bruises, be understanding, be quiet, be grateful that he even came back home at all alive. These are not mere fantasies. They are grim acknowledgements of reality. And instead of outrage, the response is silence. Violence becomes normalized first at home, then in public. A slap becomes acceptable, a punch becomes understandable, a killing becomes tragic but, well, explainable. Society slides into dehumanization not with a bang but with excuses. And the state encourages this by refusing to draw firm moral lines. When murderers are redeployed instead of prosecuted, the message spreads very fast. And the message is that force works, and participation in war gives you some sort of immunity. Children are not spared either. In fact, they are often the most vulnerable. Loud, unpredictable, unable to regulate volume or emotion. In a society flooded with traumatized men trained to respond instantly to perceived threats, this is a very deadly combination. This war will not last forever. That is one certainty no amount of propaganda can ever erase. And when it ends, hundreds of thousands of veterans will return home. Not as heroes, not as villains, but as deeply damaged individuals dropped back into a society utterly unprepared to handle them. Resocializing them will be infinitely harder than just painting these symbols on cars or staging victory concerts. Other countries will have faced this problem before. Some learned hard lessons. Effective reintegration requires early intervention, monitoring, therapy, community support, and above all, honesty. Veterans must be neither glorified nor demonized. They must be helped. And that requires money, political will, and a willingness to admit that war destroys more than enemy targets. But guess what? Russia is doing completely the opposite. It denies the problem. It romanticizes suffering. It fears its own veterans while pretending to honor them. Polls show a grotesque contradiction. People approve of high payments to soldiers, but oppose long-term benefits. You got paid, they say, didn't you? What more do you want? This gap between expectations and reality fuels resentment on both sides. Veterans feel betrayed, civilians feel threatened. And then the state shrugs. Mobilized soldiers who never volunteer desperately want normalcy. Mercenaries are just another matter entirely. Killing for money combined with military training and impunity is a recipe for long-term social decay. This is not ideology. This is arithmetic. Without massive investment in rehabilitation, Russia risks poisoning itself for generations. Trauma does not vanish, it mutates. Children raised in violent homes carry it forward. Communities adapt to fear, trust erodes, and the line between war and peace dissolves. The most honest thing we can say about the situation is also the most uncomfortable. Returning soldiers are a danger to themselves, to their families, to society. Acknowledging this is not cruelty, it is responsibility. Pretending otherwise is how disasters compound. The solution is neither honors nor humiliation, it is rehabilitation. Real, sustained, professional help, therapy, monitoring, support networks, accountability. And of course this will cost money, a lot of it. But the alternative will cost far more. In blood, in broken lives, and society hollowed out from the inside. Russia has the specialists. It has the knowledge. It even has historical experience dealing with war trauma. What it lacks is the courage to confront the consequences of its own actions. And until it does, the war will keep killing people long after the shooting stops. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support our work, the links down below, for example, Patreon memberships and PayPal donations. Thanks much for watching. See you.
We want to come to their tricks, the facade they try to sell, their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.